we're also going to hear from Steve White. Steve White is a senior research fellow at Beta. He's a behavioral economist, and he's great. And it's a pity that he's joining us online. He was going to join us in person, but unfortunately he can't come, which is, I think, it's a pity because I have heard him present in Brisbane, and I think he's one of the best speakers that I have ever heard. And it's hard to do the same online, but I think that we are going to have a lot of fun anyways. All right, so I will give this to Steve Bickley, and Steve White can start if he wants.
Easy. I'm just going to go on mute and let you run with it, Steve, and I'll help you field out questions later. So
Thanks,
just let me know when.
Thank you. Thank you to Haman. That's one of the nicest. I was a bit worried when you introduced Vic and said that he got 110 people. I thought it was very competitive, but yeah, no, thank you for your kind introduction. So for those, let me begin by acknowledging the traditional owners and custodians of the lands where I'm coming from, the Turrbal and the Yagara. I pay respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and acknowledge that Indigenous and all culturally diverse people from culturally diverse backgrounds played an important role in QT. So Steve, I'm Steve, not Steve Bickley, Steve White. I'm a research fellow in ARE-UWA, and I'm a behavioural economist. I completed my PhD in 2018, and I worked with Uwe Dulick, who was the former director of BETA, and Professor Benno Torgler, who's the current director of BETA. I'm super interested in behavioural economics because while I love neoclassical economics, a lot of the paradigms that we use tend to fall down in practice or have issues in relation to actual human behavior. I think that you have to have a line in the sand, and you have to have a starting position, and neoclassical economics gives us these incredible foundations around things like opportunity cost, rationality, and it's a really excellent place to start theoretically for us to act as scientists. But what I love about behavioral economics is that it incorporates so many different ideas and so much creativity from so many different disciplines. And I think it gives us a much broader and more refined toolbox to understand human behavior. What I'm going to talk with you today about is a bit of an introduction to applied behavioral economics. And for those in the audience who, you know, have read a lot of papers or work in this space, I'm bringing people up to speed very quickly. So there will be some technical stuff, but yeah, this is really an introductory unit. I'm going to talk a little bit about the background of behavioral economics and where it came from, because it's always really super important to understand the history behind what we're doing to understand where we're going. But it's also interesting to understand that history as well. And I'm going to talk about some of the research that we've been doing here, myself, Bic, Benno Torgler, Ben Chan, all of the team here in Brisbane, and give you some practical examples, because that's what I love about behavioral economics, is that you get the practical. I'm a big believer that economics is a discipline best served applied, you know, trying to solve complex problems. So, and I know when I teach in my undergraduate courses or when I've taught postgraduate, people get the most out of the actual practical. So let's start at the beginning. In the beginning, Adam Smith and neoclassical economics, welfare economics, policy, these mechanisms for behavior and behavior change have really only revolved around these two core mechanisms of the carrot and the stick. If you think about incentivizing good behavior, governments are really good at it. We've got a federal election at the moment, and one of the key policies everybody is trotting out is tax breaks. Tax breaks on fuel excises, tax cuts. That's the government effectively, well, one, it's a bit of pork barreling at the moment because they're trying to buy your vote. But governments use these regulatory mechanisms of incentives to try and promote positive behavior for the individual, but also for the social good. Here's some good examples. You know, we're moving to a carbon neutral economy for things like solar roofing. So governments have stepped in to subsidize part of the consumption or the demand to increase that behavior. If you're old and if you've been in Australia long enough, you remember the Howard Costello government, and they had the baby bonus, where basically they gave you a cash handout if you had kids. If you think about that again, from an economics, from an efficiency, from a productivity perspective, the human species has been surviving for hundreds of thousands of years without being paid to have sex. So it's a really inefficient way to give out money to people for something that we do anyway. The data tells us, and the research tells us that this was to improve the fertility rate in Australia, which at the time was hovering around 1.6 per dyad. It slightly increased the number of births, but the research sort of shows is that it didn't actually increase the number of births, but just brought forward the rate at which people would have offspring. So, and firms do it as well. Flybys, rewards programs. If you've ever been to Woolies and you get the points, these are ways to incentivize or encourage consumption behavior in a particular space or for a particular reason. The stick is the opposite. And governments like to punish people, one, because it's a great revenue stream. Speeding tickets and parking fines. I actually got one a couple of weeks ago. I parked outside my complex, $100, and there's nothing you can do about it. You just got to pay it. So does that actually change my behavior, parking in a space where I get a ticket? No, probably not. I'll probably still do it and just hope that I don't get fined again. If you have an economics background and you understand, or you've read, Arthur Pigu's work in relation to Pigovian taxation and demand inelastic or elastic goods, we know that for certain goods and services, particularly vices, like things like cigarettes and alcohol, we know governments love to tax those sorts of things. But again, it doesn't, as a mechanism of behavior change, it doesn't really work because we know demand inelastic vices like alcohol and cigarettes, people are addicted to them, and alcohol tastes great. No, they're demand inelastic goods. So, raising taxes on these things just take utility out of the consumer or welfare out of the consumer. They don't actually change behavior. So while historically all government policy in relation to behavior change has used these two mechanisms, they're hugely costly for governments. If you think about the incentives where you pay something out to an individual, that's just resources and tax dollars going out. It's expansionary policy. And with your negative, with your stick policies, they're things that have to be highly policed and legislated. So, criminal justice system, like I said, the parking ticket, you're actually spending a lot of money to make or derive this revenue. And what behavioral economics is super interesting is, well, how do we get away from punishing or rewarding? How can we move to a space in our policy design where we create mechanisms or environments or policy regulations that allow people to make better choices for themselves as judged by themselves, so they self-regulate effectively in their best interest and in society's best interest? And this is where BE comes in. BE isn't anything new. It's the bowerbird, effectively. Actually, that might be a poor reference. I don't know if you guys have bowerbirds on the West Coast, but we have them here in subtropical, where they go around pinching little blue things for their nests. Behavioral economists are very good at that, is taking theories and methods from other disciplines. And essentially what BE is, and you can see in this Venn diagram, is all of the foundational stuff from neoclassical economics around, opportunity cost, supply and demand, rational maximization. But then we incorporate things like cognition, emotion, personality, and take from the applied psych space. Behavioral economics hasn't been labeled as behavioral economics. It's only really probably in the last 20 years, 25 years. And this is the guy that sort of kicked it off. His name's Herbert Simon. If you know him, he was a psychologist at Carnegie Mellon. So brilliant that as an applied psychologist, he won these outstanding awards in other disciplines, in economics for the Nobel and the Turing Award. So wouldn't you love to be so good that you win awards in other disciplines? That's in the 70s. And behavioral economics as a discipline really popped up with onto the radar of sort of broader social sciences, and particularly in economics, in the late 90s and the early 2000s with Daniel Kahneman and Ava Tversky's work around prospect theory. If you've seen, there's way too much theory for me to get into in a 45-minute lecture, but probably prospect theory is the one that's most recognized in relation to how people assess or derive utility from losses and gains. If you've seen the Cartesian plane, and they have this really cool S shape. So Thinking Fast and Slow is obviously a book that's highly recommended in undergraduate spaces or at an introductory level to bring people up to speed with BE. And of course, Kahneman won the Nobel in 2002. So first behavioural economist, well, apart from Simons, to win the Nobel. Since then, we've seen an explosion of behavioural economics units in state and federal governments globally. I was talking with a colleague last year, and they said that they'd actually done a count of more than 600 behavioural economics units in the policy space globally. Here in Australia, we have Prime Minister and Cabinet Beta, Behavioural Economics Team of Australia. Our state government here in Queensland has, it's called BERT, the Behavioural Economics Research Team. And this is sort of off the back of, again, one of these seminal books by Thaler and Sunstein. There's Richard Thaler there at the top, and Cass Sunstein worked in the Obama administration. And this sort of kicked off, again, late 90s, early 2000s, the Cameron administration in the UK. And we've seen this explosion of nudging. Nudging is non-price mechanism interventions that help people to make better choices for themselves. So if you're looking for a good read, this is a great read, Nudge, and Thinking Fast and Slow is a great book as well, to bring you up to speed with a broader and more in depth with BE. They're great, two great books. So let's talk about some practical examples, and I'll give you an example of a couple of cognitive bias. So in Queensland is the most disaster-prone state in Australia. If we don't have cyclones, we've got bushfires, or you name it, there's something always happening in Queensland. And we've, across the last decade and a bit, we've had two major floods, one in 2011 and one just more recently in 2022. We had Cyclone Alfred hit the southeast corner a couple of months ago. So, we're used to, I wouldn't say used to, but we have sometimes an unreal expectation or an unreal realization of the risk that we face. I use this example because in 2011, my mum lives out on the north side of Brisbane, and her house flooded. She had 4 foot of water go through the bottom of her house. And I said to her, oh, maybe it's time to, it took more than 12 months recovery. They took out all the plasterboard, redid downstairs. I said, well, maybe it's time to sell and move somewhere else. And she said, no, it was a 1 in 100 year flood. I won't be here for the next one. And I said, Mum, that's not how probability works. And lo and behold, in 2022, we had another bigger flood, and the flood, again, flooded her place. Probability is something that lots of people talk about, but very few people actually understand in the way that we explain risk to people. And the example with my mum is a good one. The one on the right here is around the anti-vax movement. I'm going to use a practical example of COVID-19 and vaccine hesitant groups in a second. But sometimes when we process information, we deliberately exclude relevant information to give us an independent assessment, because we want confirmation of our inner beliefs or our in-group bias. And we know vaccines work. We know that vaccines stop the spread of disease. We know that a myriad of vaccines across the last 200 years have substantially improved the life expectancy of human populations across the globe. So it was not crazy, I'm not going to use the word crazy. It was at times a bit ridiculous during COVID to have people talking about 5G networks and all sorts of crazy things. I use the word crazy again, sorry. Here's a practical example. So at the time of COVID in 2021, we actually had, I won't say which state government, but we had a state government health department come and ask us about, well, how can we design behavioural interventions to maximise vaccine hesitant groups' uptake of the new COVID vaccine rollout. And at the time, they were running an ad campaign with experts. And this is Dr. Nick Coatsworth. And the ad was basically saying, look, I'm a medical expert. You should go out and get the COVID vaccine because I'm telling you as the expert. And the group that I was working with, Ben Chan, Uwe Dulick, Ozan Isler, who's now at the University of Queensland, we said to the state government, look, that's not going to work. It's not going to work with this group of people because you don't understand the way in which these people are processing information. And the example I gave you was confirmation bias. What we said was, we're currently doing this research into breast cancer, and the best thing that you could do is not have experts, have lay people, and they didn't go for it. And I'll show you why we said this. This is a silicon saline breast implant. It currently is the only way for breast reconstruction post double mastectomy or mastectomy for women in Australia. These things are highly toxic, and the information around them isn't fully known. And we were working with some biomaterials engineers at QUT who had developed this incredible new technology, breast scaffold printed breast reconstruction material. So what they do is, prior to mastectomy, they scan the breast, have a 3D scan of it, and then they print this dissolvable scaffold, and then the surgeons implant it underneath the muscle, and the muscle grows back into the scaffold, and the scaffold dissolves across 18 months, and you end up with a regrown breast. It's incredible technology. Human trials started 2 years ago. Animal trials are successful. It's a new science that is hugely beneficial to women with breast cancer, because reconstruction is obviously a huge physiological and psychological benefit for women post mastectomy. And we were working with these engineers, and they said, oh, how do we help women to understand that this technology is advantageous for them? And I said, well, how do women behave currently? And they said, don't know. And I said, well, how do the clinicians behave? How do your surgeons, how do your breast care nurses, how do they behave? How do they interact? I said, we don't know. And so we sat down and we planned out a program of research to collate behavioural data beyond diagnostic, to sort of begin to understand how effective communication and informed consent in shared decision-making models happen in these technical processes of changes to new tech. And again, you're saying, why am I showing you a breast implant and a biomaterials option? Well, it's the same as the COVID-19 vaccine. People at times have their own cognitive or behavioral bias that stops them from transitioning to a new technology that is in their best interest and in society's best interest. So the parallel here with the breast implant, I'll flick Herman through the papers. There's 3 here. There's another 2 that we've just recently published as well, but it's a whole program of research looking at how to understand how experts and novice consumers, and again, if you're more neoclassical economics, it's often referred to as a credence good, or principal agent problem, how do these people interact, and what's the best way to go about it, helping both the clinician and the patient to make the best choice. Here's what we did, 2018 to 2019, we collected the data just prior to COVID. We worked with the surgical societies, some breast cancer charities. We had a couple of surveys, again, or methodologically, I'll just point out these are stated preference, not revealed preference. We'll get to that a bit more in a second, but we asked all these questions, behavioral questions around interaction, communication, knowledge, decision, so choice. And then we also tested for some bias. We ended up with the largest ever, at that time, the largest ever breast cancer patient study in Australia, which I was really surprised at, that clinical processes and medical research in breast cancer doesn't collect as big a sample as this. So the behavioural economic perspective in relation to the quantity or the frequency of the data capture was fantastic. 53 surgeons and 101 breast care nurses. I'll give you an example. Here's one of the cognitive bias tests that we employ. So Jonathan's an ex-professional football player for Queensland. After he finished playing professionally, Jonathan became a PE teacher at a local high school. Jonathan has 2 sons, both of whom are excellent athletes. So which is more likely? A, Jonathan coaches a local junior football team, or B, Jonathan coaches a local junior football team and plays a little seniors football with the local pub team. I can see a couple of people there in the room. Not really sure how many people are online. Oh, 27, wow. not even close to you, Vic, with 110. So who thinks, let's raise our hands, who thinks A is more likely? Who thinks B is more likely? Who didn't raise their hand? This is an exam. It's
Statistics people.
So let's go again. There's no right or wrong answer. Well, there is, but let's go. Who's A? Who's B? Okay, cool. There is no right or wrong answer, but what's interesting about this question is it's not really asking you about football or Jonathan or any of those things. The question is, which is more likely? Remember I talked before about probability and people not understanding probability. The likelihood of Jonathan coaching a local junior football team, we'll just say it's a binary outcome. He either does or he doesn't, which obviously it is. And flip of a coin, we'll say it's 50%. Here in the second one, I have Jonathan coaches local junior football team, which is the first probability as it was. And then I introduce a second outcome. Yeah, this neglect of probability. So I know when it will say that the second one is 50-50 as well. I know that when I multiply two decimals together, that it must be less. So here, these two outcomes, the question doesn't really matter about the football. We've lost a little bit in our cognition. We've lost focus on what the question is asking us, and all of this other noise has distracted us. So the correct answer here is, A. It's just because there's less opportunity. In the second one, there's two. When we asked the breast cancer patients this, we found that 3 out of 4 women selected the second one. And you think, well, why is this relevant for breast cancer? But it's huge life decision in relation to breast cancer treatment. Women have lots of things adding to and noise and information around them. They may have a family history of breast cancer. They may know someone. They may be having other health issues. They may get recommendations from particular surgeons or doctors, websites. So it's really interesting to think about what this shows us is that sometimes when we design interventions or design risk information, we really need to focus on how we communicate and how people understand these processes. Again, we ran how are we going for time? Oh yeah, okay, cool. We ran some experiments, and I'll flick you the papers and you can have a proper read. We ran some experiments framing these different breast reconstruction options in different ways for women. And again, if we frame it in a positive or we frame it in a negative, women change their choice. And that's really dangerous, because what we want in any form of risk or information consent material, we want consistency of behavior. And here's another super interesting one. On the supply side, so we went and asked surgeons and nurses about their first consult with the patient. And we asked surgeons with the patient, how long did you spend with them in their first consultation? And the surgeons say about 39 minutes or 38 minutes, depending on if they're a breast and endocrine surgeon or a plastic surgeon. And we asked the surgeons, how long did your breast care nurse? Because during breast cancer diagnostics, surgeon interacts with the patient, and then there's also a breast cancer nurse support role as well. And you think about from a supply perspective and an efficiency and a productivity perspective, those two experts should be working in unison to support the patient. When we ask the surgeons, they say, both of them say they spend about 40 minutes, 39 and 38, but their breast care nurse only spent about 27 minutes in the first consultation. When we ask the nurses, how long did the surgeon spend with the patient? The nurse says only about 30 minutes, but the nurse says that they spent about 49 minutes. So we see there that the surgeon and the nurse, again, from a behavioral and a cognitive perspective, have very different understandings or very different perspectives on what the other person is doing and what they are doing. And this is this bias. We know that no matter what, one of these two is wrong. And more likely than not, both of the estimates of both the surgeon and the nurse is wrong. But it's really important to think about, well, why do they have these perceptions that one is doing more work than the other? We ran some multivariate in relation to reconstruction decisions, and the literature in the applied health, breast surgery, oncology, we had a literature review of more than 100 papers, shows that there's a myriad of reasons on why women choose to undergo reconstruction. Majority of these studies are qualitative. I'm not knocking qualitative research. But when we model it and we run the OLS, we find that age, everything drops out. Age is controlling for all variables. Age is the only thing that really is some kind of indicator for women in the way, in why, the mechanism that drives them to engage in a reconstruction. So younger women are more likely to undergo reconstruction. Let's go back a step. Let's go back to where I was talking about that Nick Coatsworth, this bloke, and you trusting him, or society trusting him in his advice to you as a vaccine hesitant person, to go as quickly as you can to go and get the vaccine. For our biomaterials breast reconstruction technology, we ask patients, surgeons, and nurses, if you were to move to a new technology, where would you seek information? And what we see is, for our surgeons and for our nurses, I'm somewhat colorblind. I think this is salmon and this is pink, or pink and salmon. I don't know. But we see for nurses and for surgeons, it's dominated by these lighter shades here in the peer-reviewed journals and surgical societies. When we train medical experts, when we have clinicians or any form of expert, we train them behaviorally to rely on the discipline, on the regulation of the system. Yeah, and it's not unreasonable, or it's completely logical that we would expect nurses and surgeons to find their information from peer-reviewed journals or the regulator or their peak body association. What happens when we ask patients, hey, look, we've got this new biomaterials breast technology, where would you get information from if you wanted to try this new tech? And patients don't care about the experts. To some degree, they care about the experts, but patients are, and you know, it was Easter a couple of weeks ago for the Catholics in the room. This is the doubting Thomas. Patients really want to see and touch. They want to talk to other patients that have gone through this experience. A successful patient, a nurse of a successful patient themselves. This tells us that in this credence market for breast cancer technology, my informed producer is informed by or seeks out information in technology transition from other experts. Patients, no.
Let me hide that little thing in the bottom because I couldn't see it coming. So continue, Stephen.
No.
Oh, sorry. So here, and this is why I said before, is that when we talked to the health department and they said, hey, look, we want to run this campaign with experts. And we said, no. If you want the consumer, if you want the patient to change their behavior, you need to understand how they process information and where they seek out information in relation to technology adoption. This campaign cost $24 million. And if you think about it, it worked to some extent. But what we know as economists, what we want to do is we want to maximize efficiency. We want to maximize productivity. So here, what would have been better in this campaign is to run with, you know, mums and dads and brothers and sisters and my local football coach. Hey, I got the jab. You know, I didn't grow a third neck and a third head. You know, I have survived. It's actually made my life better. Understanding what drives behavior change is the key to helping people to make better choices themselves.
Hey, Steve.
Yeah, mate.
Sorry, can I get you to hide that little part down the bottom?
The
stop sharing thing, and just click hide on it. Yeah, awesome. Thank you.
No worries. Teams, I love it. I'm a Zoom guy. It's like McDonald's and Hungry Jack's. Everyone has a preference. Okay, so I've given you some examples, and you know, you can be your own BE, you can be your own behavioral economist, and you can go out and test these sorts of things. This is a fantastic book by David Halpin, who ran the BIT team in the UK. And BIT has actually has an office here. If you know Alex Gianni, works out of Sydney, he's their director. Great guy, doing super interesting things in the policy space. And they've given us this theoretical framework to work with called EAST. When you want to design some kind of behavior mechanism, nudge, as they call it, it's great to think about or use this framework when designing that nudge. And I'm going to give you a practical example. So let's think about, we want to design something in relation to behavior change, as in any policy engagement. You guys obviously have more of an agriculture focus, or the beta arm at UWA has an agriculture focus. Any form of industry engagement or policy engagement, always have to think about what the deliverable is, whether that's actual practical deliverable in relation to research, or what the actual behavior change is itself. And the starting point there is to think about, well, are people, and the Mr. Spock example is a great one, is are people logically thinking through the problem themselves? Are they conscious of it? This is this system 1, system 2 thinking that we see from Kahneman and Tversky as well. So if you don't understand, or you can't measure the success or the failure, it's going to be very hard to actually design something. So you really need to logically work through this process. Here's a practical example. Passive smoking, really bad for people. And obviously in the 90s, with the changes in relation to cigarette advertising and cigarette sales, we've seen a progression of different, obviously there's a ridiculous amount of Pigovian taxation on cigarettes, but that cessation doesn't happen because we know that smoking is demand inelastic. And what we've seen is across multiple governments, different forms of neoclassical policy intervention, but also behavioural. Neoclassical in, like I just talked about, higher taxes and removal of advertising, but also behavioural in spaces like pubs and clubs with smoking areas. Why I use this example is that let's think about two different groups of smokers. Let's think about your standard 50 plus, 55-year-old Caucasian male who's smoking regularly and smokes in a social sense. And let's also think about, again, I don't know why it has to be Caucasian, could be any sociocultural background, a 16, 17, 18-year-old male smoking. Understanding the mechanisms of why those two different age groups, just as a categorical variable for age, understanding why those two are smoking is crucial to understanding how to either reduce them smoking, reduce passive smoking, or stop them smoking altogether. The age bracket one's a great example because plain packaging, lots and lots of teenagers start smoking because it's a Veblen good. It's a prestige. There's prestige to smoking, and I'm fancy because I'm smoking. It's the Jerry Seinfeld joke, look here, I've got fire trapped in my hand. I'm amazing. Whereas someone who's in their 50s who's smoking is smoking for different reasons, has had a lifetime of smoking, and that the change in the packaging for those individuals makes absolutely no difference whatsoever. So where for younger kids, and we saw it under the Gillard government, changes to plain packaging for cigarettes and the removal of all advertising, of cigarette advertising at the point of sale, has had a really positive effect on some parts of that age bracket in relation to smoking. I think, and it's one of the ones that I always use when I teach, is that smoking areas in pubs is probably one of the greatest behavioural interventions ever created and implemented. People go to the pub or they go to a restaurant because they want to socialise. They want to have a meal, they want to have a drink, they want to engage, go out on a Friday night, you want to watch the football, hang out with some of your friends, eat some chicken wings, Bic, have a good time. The smoking area, what it does is it ostracizes you from that social interaction. It takes the smokers and puts them into a room and penalizes them and takes them away from the utility that they're deriving. That in itself is a barrier to entry or a barrier to consumption for smoking, which really is effective. It really is effective. And it's something, like I said, that as opposed to for the older age bracket where plain packaging we know doesn't work, increasing the opportunity cost, decreasing utility for older smokers and putting them in a particular room by themselves actually works. So it's a really good nudge. Okay, so let's build one. Let's think about how do we, or give you some practical examples about how to use a nudge that's attractive or easy or timely or social. Here's a great example. The former director of BEST and the training center Beta, Uwe Dulek, he's German, always used to use this example, and I think it's fantastic. If you want to make people change their behavior, make it easy for them. If you want people to stay in a behavior, make it difficult for them to change. Motorcycle theft in Germany between 1980 and 1986 was reduced by 2/3 with the introduction of the compulsory helmet laws. What that does is if you're a motorbike thief, that increases your costs because you have to get off the bus or get off the train before you steal a motorbike carrying your own helmet. It's so simple, but actually that small change in behavior or in the regulation in relation to the behavior makes a big impact for a particular outcome. The other example is we have our annual Nudge-a-thon event and we schedule it in the break, in the teaching break. So because we're trying to get undergraduates to come to an event, we want to reduce the cost for them. And we also, I'll show you in a second, we want to reduce the cost for them for their attendance. Okay, this is where I'm going to struggle. How am I going to do this? Let's share. You can see that. Oh, yeah, can. Yeah. Okay.
It's probably meant to be sound though.
Yeah, but let's keep it that way. Okay.
Yeah. We can hear how that.
Yeah, imagine your piano playing.
So it's play.
Yeah, imagine a piano playing. When you have less laggy screen, you can see them sort of like playing patterns and things like that,
Yeah.
having a lot of fun with it.
Have you got no volume?
No.
Yeah, maybe you can ask you to share the name on the chat.
Yeah, we'll look at it later.
Yeah, we'll get you to share that one later, Steve. But I've explained it's meant to sound like pianos.
I can hear a piano. No.
To share system sound.
System sound.
Yes.
Yeah.
Anyone that lectures with the.
In my ruin everything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's had a tough morning. Getting.
Okay. Apologies for the audio, but you get the gist. Yeah. Making things attractive for people that they actually want to engage in allows, giving them increased utility from a particular behavior actually attracts them to change their behavior. Here's a good example, and attractive is, you have to be careful with attractive, because what is attractive, and I'm not just talking about beauty, but I'm going to give you a practical example of beauty, is that for different populations, again, what is attractive in relation to exercise? I mean, with the greatest respect, people with disability would struggle or can't participate in that. So I think that when we tailor policy and we tailor behavioural interventions, we really need to think again about who the population is that we're targeting and the behaviour that we want to change. Here's a study that myself, Ben Chan and Benno did a couple of years ago, and I want to use the example of what is attractive. This is a study we did with 7,000 online datas. It's published in PLOS ONE. I'll show you. I'll send the paper through to BIC as well. Is we asked males and females, what do you find attractive in a mate, in a potential partner? And both males and females, this is the relative importance relative to the other 8 traits. And we see distributions for males and females, this sort of light blue, salmon color, is that males and females on a positive scale greater than 1 have a distribution that say males and females both find openness in a partner as attractive. So we say, oh yeah, both sexes operate in the same way. That's good here. And we ask them, is being rich, does being rich, are you attracted to richer people? And both males and females say, no, having money, that doesn't matter. And this is where I want to be careful about the attractiveness. Here's another different study that we did, almost 3,500 online datas, again with Rob Brooks and Benno, published in Applied Economics. And we asked online datas, what do you think makes you attractive? Not what you find attractive. Remember, people said that they don't find income in the opposite sex attractive. What we find is that males who make more money think they're more attractive. So that's the exact opposite of what the males told us in relation from their stated preference to their revealed preference. And it's the same with women. The IRSAD rank is a ABS stat for things like regional house prices, income, unemployment rates by a particular area. So when we talk about what is attractive, again, we really need to understand who the population is that we're engaging, what's the mechanism, what's the behavior change that we want to implement. Third is social. We are a herd species, and we've done that. Evolution has taught us to do that as a context-dependent adaptation from a risk perspective, because it's in our own best interest not to stand out in the crowd. There is very little difference between the bison on the right and the young males in their linen shirts on the left. Okay, young men and animals and young women, males and females, act as and in relation to social collectives in a herding way, because being different historically can have huge problems for us. And it's so much so that in Australia, we even have a term for it. We call it tall poppy syndrome. Yeah, you don't want to stand out. People want to chop down the tall poppy. So there's huge benefits from not standing out, from self-protection and conformity. And again, myriad of research in different fields tells us this: economics, ecology, biology, evolutionary psychology, and they all center around this efficiency and productivity. What's the benefit of that is that you can use social mechanisms as really powerful behavior change interventions. Moral suasion and social norms are probably arguably the strongest way to change behavior. Remember your mum and your dad when you were a kid, they said, oh, if all your friends jumped off a bridge, would you jump off a bridge? And the answer is yes. Yes, I would. And yes, people do. And that's why herd behavior is so powerful. You see it in organized religion. I'm not going to bag out any particular religion, but what religions do is they regulate behavior through a social collective, a reinforcing social collective, in that everyone should operate in this particular way because that's the way the religion is focused in relation to regulating behavior. If you've seen on Netflix, there's a great doco on, I would say cult, it was a cult, but Rajneesh and Osho, check it out. Being able to liberate or motivate tens of thousands of people to build whole cities and change their behavior, it's incredible to watch. And we see it every day. We see it with Swifties and Taylor Swift, is that people want to behave in a collectivist way, in a norm way, to fit in. Yeah, it's beneficial for them. They derive utility themselves. So what we can do is we can help sort of pull those strings in relation to the social norms. If you've read Persuasion by Robert Cialdini from Arizona State, probably one of the most pivotal social psychology books in history, absolutely incredible book. And he talks about this broken window theory, and that descriptive norms are so much more powerful and always win over injunctive. And that is what I see people doing in my own neighborhood, what I see people in PhD students doing in the bullpen here at QT, what I go to the footy and I see how other people behave, that will always be a more powerful predictor and influencer on my behavior than the regulatory interventions that the government imposes on me or that anybody imposes on me. What I see, I do. And that's the example I used around, mum and dad saying, would you jump off a bridge if your mates did it? Where's the bridge, mum? Let's do it. Here's some examples for Benno, Professor Benno Torgler, who's the current director of BETA. He's a world leader in tax morale and tax behavior, which again is this sort of neoclassical foundation of economics and policy, tax. You know, until you sort of do economics or start to get into the academics or the philosophical of economics, tax is very boring. But if you think about it, tax is the one continuum throughout human history in relation to resource redistribution from top to bottom that can be the most studied. And again, Benno's got some of these great studies that show that knowing or understanding or hearing what, you know, Joe Bloggs beside you is doing, your neighbor, is often more powerful than being told what to do from a regulatory perspective. Last one, timely. Timing matters. When you have your intervention and when you engage people with whatever your behavior change nudge is, it's so crucial that you get people at the right time where they can absorb and engage you know, the value of what you're trying to achieve. On the right here, you've obviously got a gentleman who was around when these ducks were born, and the ducks now think that it's the bloke's, their mum, following around. So we know biology and evolution tells us that timing is important. But here on the left, we've got at Coles or Woolies, you have different spaces. So the place that you spend the most when you go shopping is at the checkout when you're leaving. You're standing there for the most single greatest period of time. There's a reason that the chocolates are at like a 3-foot level, and there's a reason that the magazines are at a 5-foot, 6-foot level, is because when you're standing there, if you have children, your children's head and eyes are timed perfectly to look at this small consumption decision of sugar. For adults, the positioning and the timing of the magazines, again, is at head height. So the way in which, and this is, if you, again, read Cialdini's book around persuasion, understanding when and how to engage people in relation to consumption decisions or changing their behavior, timing is super, super important. Here's a study that Benno and Ben and I and Harry Smith, who was a master's student here many moons ago, we looked at pharmacist compliance with regulatory behavior or regulatory guidelines in relation to the morning after pill, or the EHC, the emergency hormonal contraceptive. And what we found was, again, timing matters. When women go into a pharmacy and say, I've had unprotected sex, or the contraception that I was using, I think, has failed, I need the EHC. We found this quote here from one of our research assistants where the pharmacist actually said, they sold it to me because it was a Friday and she was worried I wouldn't be able to get to a GP. We know that's nonsense. We know that you can go to a GP, even telehealth GP, 24/7. So the timing of when people engage in relation to regulatory behavior or the mechanism of engagement itself really, really matters. I've just given you a whirlwind introduction to B and to the East framework. There's so many great theories in behavioral economics. And I mean, I just put my favorite there in relation to prospect theory. But please go out and dig into the literature, or I'll send some of the work that we've done through. Check out Kahneman, if you haven't already checked out Kahneman's book or Sunstein's book. There's so much to dig into. And like I said, behavioral economists are very good at pinching stuff from other disciplines. So I'm sure there's stuff that you already know in whatever discipline you're from as well. Thanks, everybody. Yeah, really appreciate the opportunity, and hope you enjoyed the presentation.
Awesome. Good job, mate. Thank you, Steve. That was great. We now have 5 minutes for question. Is there any question here in the room?
Hi, Stephen. Hi, I'm
Hey.
Anna. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear.
Yeah. Thanks so much for the presentation. It was fascinating. I want to hear more about how you collaborate with other disciplines, including biology and neuroscience, especially in terms of risk taking, knowing that a lot of our risk taking decisions are governed by our our hormones, our endocrinal function, and our circadian rhythms, and all of that. And knowing that behavioral economics is expanding to the disciplines, I'm wondering whether you were engaging more with the neuroscience field.
That's a great question. Yeah, there's a lot of neuroeconomics, great stuff that you can dig into from a behavioral perspective. I myself have worked, I've been really lucky to work with some evolutionary biologists, great evolutionary biologists. Robert Brooks, Associate Professor Robert Brooks at University of New South Wales. And his stuff, we sort of had a joint interest in when I was doing my master's in 2012. I was really lucky. I got a really large chunk of data from RSVP, the dating website, and I had been digging into the research literature to try and understand. At that time, economics was interested in matching models. Shapley and Roth had won the Nobel Prize, and we were really interested in, myself and Benno Torg were interested in understanding how dyads form and break apart. And I had gone through the research literature, and Rob Brooks was sort of the go-to guy in evolutionary biology in Australia in relation to mate choice or mating decisions. And I just simply reached out to him and said, oh, I've got this cool data set. Would you be interested in working on this topic with me? And then it spawned, I think we've got 4 publications or 5 publications now. And Rob's got 2 fantastic books. The first one is called Sex, Genes and Rock and Roll. It won the Queensland Literary Award in, I think, 2010. So check out that book. But those sort of collaborations, I've been really, really lucky in that my supervisor, Benno Torgler, is someone that is so interdisciplinary and works across so many spaces. And he always encouraged me to, be brave and reach out to different disciplines and bring that into your science. It's going to be so much more robust, whatever you do and whatever you find, if it's validated across multiple disciplines. So yeah, I've worked in the evolutionary biology space. I don't do much neuro, or I don't do any neuro stuff. But I think that the behavioral neuro space is super, super interesting.
Thank you. Any other questions here? Okay, I have a question.
Yeah, man.
Yeah, there are no questions online at the moment. So how is the job market for behavioral economists at the moment in Australia and outside of academia?
It's a great question. The job market for anybody, I'm, like I said, 7 years out and I'm still on contract. I'm in a group that I love, which is the bonus. The job market is tight for anyone in economics, anyone in any discipline, and anybody that says that it's not is telling whoppers. In relation to, and let's talk about the job market, not just as academia, but also in policy. In policy, it's fantastic. All of our HDR students that have graduated in the last, well, since I've been supervising since 2018, now hold pretty senior roles in state and federal government. Vic helped supervise Nikita Ferguson, Martin Brumpton. I think we've got 5 people working in the Federal Department of Education at the moment. And like I used the example at the start in relation to behavioural units across state and federal governments, there is an explosion of interest in behavioural interventions, because from a policy perspective, it doesn't cost governments anything. So I think that if you're thinking about the job market, and Haman, you're a great example too, is that I was talking with you about we do research with Wine Australia, and your topics really lend themselves to that real industry engagement. And I think that they ran out, or were a sponsor for Nudgeathon a couple of years ago. My recommendation to any early career researcher or HDR student is work hard, and these opportunities will come, whether they're in academia or whether they're in policy. But I think there's a real opportunity to move quite quickly and progress quite quickly in state and federal policy at the moment for behavioural grads. All of our behavioural economics grads are working in really quality, high-ranking roles now. So yeah, academia is a bit tougher, but yeah, that academia has always been tough, so yeah.
Just got the one question with the hand up.
The person with the hand up, would you like to ask your question? You can unmute yourself or just ask the question on the chat.
Kamal, is that you?
I think she might have had a hand up from the exercise earlier.
Oh, okay, cool.
All right, any other question in the group here? No? Okay, we're on time anyway, so that's great. Thank you very much for that great presentation. If you want to say something else, we have a couple of minutes.
Thanks everybody for coming along to support myself and Beck. It's great to talk about my science and our science. If you're interested in our Nudgeathon case competition is in September, the 22nd to the 24th. And this year's sponsor is Queensland Department of Transport. And it's basically a mini short course case competition using behaviour change theory and application. I'll send some of the details through to Haman already. But if you're interested in sending a team, we'd love to get you guys across to Brisbane and be part of it. Vic's been a competitor and he's also helped an event organising as well, so he can definitely answer some questions. But if you're looking for an opportunity to come to Brisbane in September, which is the best time to visit Brisbane, please think about coming to our behaviour change competition, Nudgeathon.
Great. And is it too early for you to say something about the second part of your email on the one of next year?
So we're also, the competition is so popular, is that we're actually going to have, this is our 8th year or 8th competition. We're actually going to have a 9th one almost pretty much straight away in February. And that one is sponsored by the Queensland Department of Agriculture. So I think that ticks the boxes for you guys in a big way. Again, I know how tight university funding is. And let me put the caveat there is that if you can get yourself here, we pay for 2 nights accommodation for you and we pay for all your meals. So yeah, from a cost perspective, there is some opportunity. But Haman, that is, I'll send, once we have that confirmed, we're still dealing with the department and confirming it, but once we have that confirmed, I'll shoot that through to you guys as well. I think that's one that's right in your wheelhouse from the ag perspective. So
okay, that's great. Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks, guys.